Hi there, welcome to the channel and welcome back if you're a return viewer. You're watching the Christchurch Review of Books YouTube channel and I am Kerry. Today, just a quick review of a book I finished almost a month ago now, and it's started to fade from my initial feelings and impact of it, so I have quickly decided to do this review before I forget it all. Not saying that it's a forgettable book, but just parts of it just had more impact than others. Now the book I'm talking about today is Just As Well I'm Leaving by Michael Booth. Now Michael Booth is an author I've come to appreciate and love over the last 6 or 7 years. First book I read by him was The Almost Nearly Perfect People, a kind of a travel log around the Scandinavian countries and looking at what makes them tick and their little foibles and strange habits and how they feel about each other. It was a really interesting book. It kind of opened my eyes to this form of journalistic travel writing with a dose of humour. And I since went back and read everything else that Booth has written. He's kind of specialises in travel and or food, a combination of both or just one or the other. He's a great writer. He's, along with his journalism, he indulges in a lot of personal what can I say, he's self-effacing and he doesn't take himself too seriously, and he knows all his own limitations, but he's really good at going to these countries and fishing out the little details and things that the outsider may not really know from looking from the outside. Anyway, Just As Well I'm Leaving is his very first book, so I've gone back to the start with him. Came out in 2005, which was I think the 200th anniversary of the birth of the main subject of the book. That is the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen. Now you probably have heard of Hans Christian Andersen. If you haven't, I'd be very surprised. He's written a lot of stories which have become part of like the Western canon of children's stories and fables and what have you. The most well-known one's probably The Emperor's New Clothes, and there's other things like The Princess and the Pea. Some of his stories are ostensibly for children get quite dark. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of cruelty, but he's become very well-known. At one point he was one of the best-known people in Europe, if not the Western world. In this book, the title is actually from a letter that Andersen wrote, because he was frequently feeling unwelcome at home, and that's what this book really kind of delves into. Booth has recently, when this was written, moved to live in Denmark because his wife got a job there, and he studies the Danish people for a while and trying to figure out what makes them tick, and he finds that one thing that unites them is their veneration of Hans Christian Andersen as a great figure in their history. They can think that he does no wrong, and the official view is that he was some type of amazing character which put Denmark on the map, and they kind of like worship him for that. Now Booth looks into this and discovers that a lot of Hans Christian Andersen's backstory has been kind of whitewashed by the official version, and Booth kind of investigates what we know about Andersen and finds out that he was quite a different character than the official version. He was very neurotic, insecure, and I think at one point he calls him a drama queen. He came from a very poor background and kind of had to claw his way up into the high society of the times. And one of the books that Booth uncovers is The Poet's Bazaar, written by Andersen in 1840, and this follows his journey from across Europe to the then still very exotic Orient, namely Turkey, as we'd call it today. And Booth decides to follow in Andersen's footsteps and recreate the journey, but in the 21st century. And that's what mainly the book follows, Booth's adventures following Andersen's, and we get Andersen's entries and diary entries and letters, whatever, about when he was visiting these countries, kind of juxtaposed against the modern day, well, early 2000s, adventures of Booth at the same time. Now, it's quite interesting. I enjoyed it. The self-effacing humour of Booth is always welcome, but it's really Andersen that sticks in the mind. The strange behaviours of Andersen. He was a very strange man, even back in the 19th century. People laughed behind his back about his personal appearance. He basically threw himself upon the various rich people around him to try and get patronage to write his plays and write his poems and write his stories, and he failed in his efforts as much as he succeeded. But that's kind of like been whitewashed away by history. So we go from France, Germany, Italy, Malta, Greece, and through to Constantinople, as it was called at the time. At each stop we get the impressions of what Anderson found, and then we get the impressions of what Booth found and how things have changed or how things have stayed the same. Booth tries to travel the same routes and use the same methods of transport as Anderson did, but this simply isn't possible in the modern day world apparently. There's very few sea passenger routes between some of these cities and countries now, and Booth even has to end up taking a plane on one or two occasions. Like by some of the towns which Anderson stopped in simply either no longer exist or simply way out of the way of modern transport routes. And we get an impression of Anderson along the way which kind of sticks in the mind. He was, like I said, he was a neurotic, kind of self-reflective, self-obsessed character who at various times hated the people that were around him, or then at other times he was afraid of being so alone, and he was a bit of a hypochondriac. He thought he was dying of every second illness that he'd heard of, and he somehow managed to make it all the way to Turkey. And then for the return journey they travelled up the Danube River on a couple of boats with a motley crew of passengers and crew, and passed through Eastern Europe and then back into the Western European side of things, and that was it. And Booth basically follows this journey. He does find a riverboat transport back into Europe. Yeah, like I said, the modern day stuff that Booth encounters kind of fades quickly from your memory. It's merely the story and background of Hans Christian Andersen. There's a lot of modern debate about his sexuality. He appears to be either gay or bisexual, which is something which the Danes didn't really want to have discussed until recently. But there are a lot of letters that he left behind where he's fawning and offering his undivided love for either a young man or in some cases a young woman. Made a bit of a fool of himself like that throughout his life. Yeah, like I said, something that no one wanted to talk about until very recently. So it's an enjoyable book. I enjoyed learning about Hans Christian Andersen. It's a bit of a revelation, you know, one of those authors that you read in your childhood and you never really thought that much about his backstory, and then you find out all this stuff. Like I said, the modern day stuff is neither here or there. Booth is an amusing writer, but he's really just pulling together the threads of his research and presenting a coherent narrative to hang the Andersen stuff on for this book, and that's really what a good journalist does anyway. So that is, Just As Well I'm Leaving, I almost got the title wrong there, Just As Well I'm Leaving by Michael Booth. This is the 2005 original paperback edition. It was republished again in 2016 with a totally different cover in the wake of the success of the Almost Nearly Perfect People, which is a book that kind of relaunched Booth onto the world scene, everyone's favourite author for a while. Yeah, he's done other books about travelling in Asia, Japan, and France, and cooking, and India with cooking, and all sorts of things. He's a good author. If you like food and travel and humour, you could probably go a lot worse than looking him up and reading some of his book. So that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Have a good day.